Dante came into Sandra's life at a crucial moment, though neither of them knew it yet. Sandra, a 22-year-old young woman, had grown up in a challenging environment, but she had always remained resilient. She lived in a modest house on the outskirts of the city with her partner, Carlos, a hardworking man who was often serious and reserved. However, something was missing in her life: companionship, genuine affection, and a spark to brighten her days. It was on a rainy Tuesday in October, as she walked home from work, that Sandra found Dante. The dog was curled up under a bridge, shivering from the cold and visibly hungry. He was a mixed-breed dog, with short brown fur marked by uneven white patches, large ears, and eyes that conveyed a mix of sadness and hope. His protruding ribs told stories of abandonment, but also of resilience. Moved by the sight, Sandra stopped. "Hey, little guy, are you alone?" she asked gently, crouching down. Dante lifted his head, his brown eyes meeting hers with initial distrust, but soon they gleamed with curiosity. Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of bread. At first hesitant, Dante cautiously approached and took the bread delicately. It was then that Sandra made her decision. She couldn't leave him there. "Come on, do you want to come with me?" she said softly. And as if he understood every word, the dog stood up and began to follow her. That day marked the beginning of a bond neither of them knew would become vital for both. When Carlos arrived home and saw the dog, he wasn't particularly thrilled. "Another expense, Sandra? We barely have enough for ourselves," he said. But Sandra insisted. "I couldn't leave him there, Carlos. He deserves a better life. Besides, he won't eat much. He looks smart enough to guard the house," she added. Reluctantly, Carlos agreed, though he made it clear he had no intention of getting attached. Dante quickly adapted to his new home, proving to be an intelligent and loyal dog. The next day, Sandra took him to the vet, using part of her savings to ensure he was healthy. That first night, Dante slept at the foot of her bed, as if he understood he had found his place. From that moment on, he became her shadow, following her everywhere and responding with enthusiasm to every kind word and gentle touch. Sandra, in turn, found in Dante a source of pure joy, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Dante had a playful yet wise energy. Despite having lived on the streets, he wasn't destructive. He enjoyed morning walks with Sandra and lying at her feet while she read or did household chores. Carlos, however, remained distant, barely tolerating the dog. Dante seemed to sense this coldness, and while he never provoked Carlos, he also never sought his attention. As the days passed, Sandra began to notice something else. Dante seemed to be more than just a dog. There was something about the way he watched her, how his gaze followed her as if he understood her emotions. When Sandra felt lonely or distressed, he was there, resting his head on her lap or gently wagging his tail to cheer her up. It was as if Dante knew the role he had to play in her life, one that went beyond anything Sandra could have imagined. Their bond deepened, with Dante showing her an unconditional love that gave her strength to face her daily struggles. His loyalty and protective nature began to emerge in small ways. He barked when strangers came too close to the house. He carefully watched Carlos whenever he raised his voice during an argument, always positioning himself between Sandra and any potential threat, even if that threat was only in his mind. But Dante had no idea that he was soon to face the greatest challenge of his life, one that would test his love and protective instincts, forever sealing his place as Sandra's guardian angel. Like most mixed-breed dogs, Dante had a unique combination of traits that made him special. Though he couldn't be associated with a specific breed, his intelligence, loyalty, and adaptability were undeniable, qualities that often shine in mixed-breed dogs. His eyes always carried a look of attentiveness, and his agile, sturdy body was a clear testament to his life on the streets. Dante was an observant dog, always alert, with a personality that balanced curiosity and calm. He had his own peculiar routines. He liked to sit in the backyard, watching the neighborhood as if everything happening around him was his responsibility. He also enjoyed exploring, poking his nose into every corner of the house and sniffing any new object with great interest. Sandra quickly realized that Dante wasn't just a dog, he was a true companion. The connection they had formed the moment she found him under the bridge grew stronger each day. His presence filled an emotional void that Sandra had been carrying for a long time. In him, she found comfort, companionship, and a constant source of joy. Dante also had his own unique habits. He liked watching television whenever Sandra put on animal documentaries, something she found adorable. At night, he always did a round of the house before settling into his bed in the corner of the room. That sense of responsibility was part of his nature, and Sandra deeply appreciated it. But what stood out the most was his ability to read Sandra's emotions. If she came home upset or sad, Dante stayed close, following her as if to make sure she wasn't alone in her struggles. The bond between Dante and Sandra was deep, a connection forged through love and gratitude. He had found a home, and she had found a loyal friend. But even though Dante was a source of happiness, his protective instincts seemed to grow stronger with time. This instinct would soon be put to the test in a moment that would change Sandra's life forever. The night when Dante would prove the magnitude of his love and loyalty began quietly, like so many others. Sandra had a difficult day at work and had barely exchanged words with Carlos, whose attitude seemed colder and more distant than usual. However, she was used to the tension in the atmosphere and tried to focus on her own tasks. That night, after dinner, she retreated early to the bedroom, seeking the peace she so desperately needed. Dante followed her, as always, settling near the door. In the middle of the night, a loud noise shattered the silence. Carlos, visibly agitated, stormed into the room, demanding explanations for something Sandra didn't understand. His tone quickly turned aggressive, and Sandra tried to calm him down, but her attempts only seemed to fuel his anger further. The argument escalated, and in an act of uncontrolled rage, Carlos grabbed a knife from a nearby drawer. Sandra stepped back, paralyzed by fear, as Carlos advanced toward her with the weapon in hand. Dante, who had been watching the scene from his spot in the hallway, reacted instinctively. With a deep growl that Sandra had never heard before, the dog lunged between Carlos and his owner, positioning himself as a protective barrier. Carlos, blinded by his fury, tried to push the dog away, but Dante stood firm, blocking any approach towards Sandra. The dog took multiple blows from the weapon, but never backed down. His gaze reflected an unbreakable determination to protect the one he loved so much. The shouting and commotion alerted a nearby neighbor, who decided to intervene by calling the authorities. Meanwhile, Sandra, amidst the chaos, seized a moment of distraction to run out into the hallway and seek help. Though injured, Dante continued ensuring that Carlos couldn't follow her or get close to her. When the officers finally arrived, they found Sandra safe and Dante still fulfilling his duty of protection. Carlos was removed from the scene, and the situation was brought under control. Sandra ran to Dante, overwhelmed with worry and emotion. Although he had sustained some wounds in his attempt to protect her, his energy and devotion remained intact. In that moment, she realized that Dante was not just her companion, he was a true guardian. That night changed everything, leaving an unforgettable lesson about the power of love and loyalty. After that night filled with tension and bravery, Sandra made a definitive decision. Her well-being and Dante's had to be her priority. The next day, she began the process of leaving behind that harmful relationship. With the support of the authorities and the help of close friends, Sandra was able to gain the space and security she needed. Dante, though showing some discomfort from the wounds he had suffered, continued to display his resilient and protective nature. The bond between Sandra and Dante grew exponentially in the days that followed. As she cared for her faithful companion's wounds, Sandra realized how much she emotionally depended on him and how his presence brought her comfort. Dante, in turn, seemed to understand that Sandra was also going through a healing process. Every time she sat on the couch or cried in silence, he would approach, rest his head on her lap, and stay there, calming her with his mere presence. Meanwhile, Sandra began working on her personal growth. She attended therapy to overcome the recent trauma and started seeing Dante as a constant source of inspiration. His bravery and loyalty reminded her that she, too, could be strong and courageous. Soon, Sandra decided it was time to move to a quieter place where they could both start anew. She found a small apartment with a nearby park, ideal for Dante to enjoy the outdoors. Moving day was a significant moment. As Sandra packed the last boxes, she reflected on everything they had been through together in such a short time. Dante watched her from the doorway, his energy renewed and his eyes filled with unconditional love. When they arrived at their new home, they explored the space together. Excited, Sandra let Dante be the first to run around the small yard. His joy at moving freely was a reminder of all they had overcome. Finally, Sandra understood just how much she had grown thanks to her loyal companion. Her self-confidence had been restored, and her outlook on the future was more optimistic. Dante, as always, remained by her side, ready to face any challenge. The experience not only brought them closer than ever, but also gave them a new opportunity to build a life filled with love, security, and hope. Sandra and Dante's story teaches us that love and loyalty transcend words. In the darkest moment of her life, Dante, a dog many would have considered ordinary, demonstrated extraordinary courage and devotion. His actions not only saved Sandra's life, but also gave her the emotional strength to rebuild her future and prioritize her happiness and well-being. This unbreakable bond reminds us of the positive impact that animals can have in our lives, offering us support, protection, and unconditional love even in the most difficult moments. Stories like Sandra and Dante's inspire us to cherish and protect our four-legged friends. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to discover more tales of bravery, love, and resilience that prove why dogs are the silent heroes in our lives. Share this story with friends and family who love animals so that together, we can celebrate the wonderful bond between humans and dogs. Dante reminded us that in a world full of challenges, there is always hope when there is love.